So welcome everybody. As I said, today's session is about applications and the spray seeding plan report, preparing for an applications. The examples I have today are in trial files, but I think pretty much everything we cover is pretty well ports over to a protocol as well. As you're planning out what applications need to take place, a lot of this process carries over, whichever type of file you might be in. This really will apply. So, well, we'll dive right in. Just as a brief introduction to applications in ARM, in case you aren't too familiar with them, you will find either in the protocol description or the site description, depending on the type of file you're in, a section for application information. And really the key that that comes with these applications, you'll see we have a table in that application description in ARM, and each event, we'll call it an application event for the moment, gets its own letter. So we kind of denote an application by letters instead of numbers. That way it helps to differentiate from the treatments. So in the treatments editor, we'll refer to treatment number 1, treatment number 2. So we use letters for applications. So it's kind of fundamentally different when we look at the two of them. And so each application event has its own letter. And in my trial that I have open right here, you can see there's 4 events. So I have applications A through D that have been defined and filled in to some extent. So that's really how applications are structured in ARM. And as you plan additional applications, you can insert additional columns. So as you create a brand new protocol, you'll only have one application, and then you can continue to add and grow that list by just inserting a repeating section. That's what we call a kind of either a table in ARM that can expand. And just depending on how many of those objects or events are occurring, then you can continue to build out as many as you need. So I just right click and insert repeating section, and that will add a 5th application here, application code E, to this list. So that's the way to begin to fill in your application. And I'm actually going to delete that one out since I've already kind of have everything connected here. So the application code, we have the A through D. Once you've kind of defined what you're going to be doing in the applications, the key that we need to do is link up those application events to the treatments themselves. So here on the treatments editor, you have your list of products that are being applied in the study. And we need to connect those application events to denote when that particular treatment will be applied to the trial. And so that is done through the application code row. Let me try to resize this column a little bit, and you can see some of these fields here. So the first few columns in the treatments editor are related to the treatment itself, the formulation, the rate it's applied, etc. But you'll find on the right, there is a column for application code. And that is where we connect that information that was in that site description about the application event that's occurring. We want to link our treatment to those events. So in this case, my treatment 2, this Stomper Plus product, is going to be applied twice. And I'm linking it to the application code A and the application code C. So it's a foliar application at weed emergence or something as just a basic example. And if I switch back over to the application, we'll just be able to see all that information about when it's being applied. So I can see the 1st of June and the 22nd of June is when this product was applied. Again, we're in a trial, so we're acting as though if this has already occurred. But you can see all the details of the application, and we're linking those details to a particular product here on the treatments list. So in my example here, this example trial we're using, we're just saying we've got 3 different there's 3 treatments here. 2 of them are the same Stomper Plus product, just being applied at a different rate. And then we have a Super Stomp herbicide that we need to specifically have an adjuvant mixed with. And that creates really our 3 different treatments with an untreated check present as well. And really, I use this example to point out that here with this 4th product, we want to apply it at the same time as the other products, but there's something inherently different. Maybe I need to use a different equipment. In this case, it's a tank mix. So there's fundamentally different aspects to applying treatment number 4 compared to 2 and 3. Therefore, I have given it a separate application code. So both components of treatment 4, you'll notice we link to a particular application code. So it could be that there's maybe even a 3rd component. Maybe we put another product with treatment 4, and that one will happen later. And that could have been our application code E that we added. You don't have to have every component of a treatment be identical. In this case, they are because they're going to be applied together, but there is the full flexibility to enter whichever application code matters for each individual component. It doesn't have to be at an entire treatment number level. So again, this example here, tank mix is a big enough difference, or we have differences in how the application will be performed, and so it needs a different application code. If I go back to my application here, you had already noticed that both A and B were performed on the same date, and the same thing with C and D are performed at the same date. So although some of the details may be similar, it's still a foliar application. But we'll see in the application equipment, which has the very same application codes, just more information about the application. You can see that we ended up requiring a different spray volume and therefore a different mix size because it was a tank mix. And so we needed to have a separate application, even though it's really on the same date. So I try to stress that. I think sometimes it's, and it certainly depends on your research. A lot of research is pretty straightforward. We go out 3 times and all products are applied those 3 times, bing, bang, boom, ABC, simple. But in some cases, depending on your treatments, depending on the equipment involved, you might have a case where an application code doesn't mean it matches with a date. And in fact, in this case, we have that example that we actually use 2 codes for the same date. And that's just fine. And part of the flexibility of ARM, being able to define and link up these codes just depending on what the treatments and the application require. So again, just to recap, the application information is found in your protocol or your site description. You fill in the details of what needs to happen or document what occurred at the time of application. And you need to then connect up those details to the particular treatment line components for when those products were applied. And that's how we connect that information within the trial and within the protocol. So once we have that linked up, now we are able to use ARM to calculate how much of these products we will need when we go to perform that application. So let's imagine here in our case, we haven't actually performed these applications. Maybe I'll clear out our application dates here, and we're ready to go out to do that A and B applications, for example. What we will do is print, we have a report. So under File, Print Reports, we have a report called the Spray Seeding Plan. And in a protocol, very similar, it's just called the Protocol Spray Seeding Plan, but it's really the same report essentially. But the Spray Seeding Plan will calculate for us the amount of product that we need for each of those treatments based on the application settings. So I am going to use the report preview on this tab so we can kind of take a look at the report without getting too far into ARM and have to click back and forth. So what this report will do, you can see we're getting our list of treatments and the various treatment information. We can, of course, control some of that information of what gets included and what doesn't. So that's all kind of congregated here. We have our application amount and mix size as well. So some information can come from the application area also. And then kind of the main headliner here of what we came here for this report is the amount of product to measure. Maybe I'll zoom in just a little more here. So the amount of product to measure then is that calculation ARM is giving us. So based on the plot size and the spray volume and mix size at a rate of 3.5 kilograms per hectare, then we will need to measure out 96.25 mils of the Stomper Plus product to be applied across these plots. And so we can kind of get some of that randomization to where those plots are in this particular trial, where that product needs to be applied. So that is the main goal of this report. Of course, it's each of our products here will have that calculation. If I scroll down, there's one other section to this report, and it's the product amount totals. So this will look across the list of products and across all of our applications. So here, we were performing 2 applications of each product. It will total up how much of each product we need to have in total. So for example, we need 446 mils of the Stomper Plus product. Because if you recall, both treatments 2 and 3 are using this Stomper Plus. They were just at a different rate. So this has added up both occurrences of that Stomper Plus at both of those application codes as well to get kind of a grand total amount. So this can be useful for a trialist to say, do we have enough before we start this trial? Did we receive enough product from the sponsor? Do we have enough here at our location to make it through this trial? Or a protocol writer, if you are the sponsor, it's let's make sure we send enough product out. So that's really useful for this table. Again, lists out all the unique products. You can see there is an overage that you can adjust in the options as well to make sure you have enough. So that 25% overage is added already onto this table, the totals that we get there. So those are the main components of the report. Want to highlight a couple of options to customize the way this report prints out. So going back to the report options, first one I want to show is under application code. You can choose to sort the report by application code. So before, when this option was off, you saw we had just one single table with all of our products across all the application codes and told us the amount. If we turn this option on and then go to our preview, now what we get is the first page only has 2 products on it. And that's because we are only showing application code A. So only treatment components that are related to application code A are displayed here on this page. Then as I scroll down to the next page, we start on a brand new page. We have a table for application code B. So now only product components that are linked to B are on this table. And then of course it continues, application code C and application code D. So we get a separate table, separate page for each application, application code, application event. And then at the end, we have, in this case, we had one product that was not linked to any application code. So it gets treated separate as its own table of ones that are blank. And in this case, it's the check. So there's not a whole lot to show there. And then we still have that product total. So that is the sort by application code. Essentially gives you a separate table for each and every application code you have. So that could be handy to print out, and now you'll have 4 pages for the 4 different applications that you can reference. I do have a question here, and I think we'll probably save it for the end. Questions about some of the certainly a different type of application than the simple herbicide we have here with orchards and grapes, using the canopy height and the leaf wall area. So I'll try to save a little time at the end to show a couple of those. We'll make sure to have that. Those are definitely a different can of worms, as we say, that different system there. So cycling back here to the report options, that was the sort by application code. Let me turn that back off here and move to the option to the left here, the product amounts based on. So originally we had it set to the mix size, so it will calculate, that product amount calculation we saw there were the number of mils per mix size that we had defined in the application. We can calculate with a slightly different basis, if you will. We could have those calculations totaled up across the area of one plot or the area of one treatment. So maybe I'll turn on the area of one treatment and just show. And here, now that I changed this option, ARM is asking me that there's a similar option in the product amount totals section of the options. And it's prompting me, do I want to have those both be calculated the same way? So I'm going to say yes, I'd like both sections of my report to have that product amount totals based on, to have the same basis essentially. So now if we look at our table here, we have that Stomper Plus, and now we have the number of milliliters for 5 plots. So that was the total amount that we need to apply for those 5 plots. And again, we list those plots out. So that was the key there, changing the basis for the calculation. So this was 87.5 mils per 5 plots. If we had used the area of one plot, you'll see really the internal calculations are consistent. Now this is 17.5 mils per 1 plot. So it's using the same calculations, and then it's just a matter of how do I want it summarized? Do I want to see the one plot? Do I want to see across all 5 plots? What's my total? or once again, as we had started with originally, product amount based on the mix size. And I'll say, yes, let's make sure that product totals is using that option. And now we have 96.25 mils per mix. And the reason that's different is our mix size was calculated. So we had calculated that mix size amount in the application. And so that's where I actually want to go next. Because that's one confusing part of defining the application. So I'm going to go to the application equipment section. We had saw briefly before, that is where the application amount and mix size was specified. So first, just to show the mix size, you'll notice that we have a little tool icon here in the mix size instead of the typical validation list dropdown. When I click that tool, we actually get our mix size calculator. And in this case, it's for application A. So we have our application amount, which in this case is a spray volume. Might be another term that's used for this type of application. So that is the kind of the rate that we would apply the water plus product mixture across the plot. So again, the key here for our treatments, we're diluting the product in water as the carrier to spread it across the field. And so in this case, the rate of that spray volume essentially is the 200 liters per hectare. So we define that here in the application amount. Then based on our trial settings, which we show here, the number, for 5 replicates in this study, the plot size that we have in settings ends up being 24 square meters for a plot, and the application amount of 200 liters per hectare. ARM can calculate the bare minimum amount that we would need to mix up of that product and water in order to cover the area of a single plot, or the area of a single treatment, excuse me. So this would be 2.4 liters is the bare minimum to make it across the field for a particular treatment in those 5 replicates. Of course, we'd be cutting it pretty short if we only calculated that much exactly. So then we have an overage to define as well. So whether you would want to run a 10% overage, or maybe you have a specific number of mils, maybe to fill the lines for this particular equipment, we always need 150 mils, whatever your system is. You can see the calculation is changing as I'm changing the numbers. I'll go back to the 10%. So then ARM has now calculated, it will add that overage to that bare minimum, and we get the calculated mix size. Then here is 2.64 liters. So that's a great tool to make sure that you're going to mix up enough before you begin the application for that treatment. So that is how we arrived at these values here. And you can see with application B, we had a larger spray volume for whatever reason with that tank mix. And so with the different overage, we ended up with a different mix size in the end. And that was really what triggered us to use a different application code in the first place. So that's where that mix size and application amount come from on that report. Now, one slightly confusing part to ARM is that this isn't actually the only place these 3 fields exist. So on the treatments editor, you may have noticed when we were looking at the application code that even farther over to the right, we actually have columns on the treatment editor for the application amount and the mix size. So these, although it looks very handy to fill them in, these should not be used unless specifically your treatment, part of your treatment and your study design is to investigate different application amounts. That's really about the only case where it would be valid to fill them in here. We tried to actually take these away a few versions ago. We hid these, or I think we made them read only or something, but then there were a few studies out there where, nope, actually that's part of the treatment component, is either the mix size or maybe the spray volume or whatever it was. So we had to put them back, but we'd love to just make them gone because this isn't the first place ARM will look. So when we're generating the spray seeding plan, the first place ARM will look to determine what's the, how much do I need to calculate? We'll go to the application equipment, find the application code that it's printing out, and look at these values first. If this was blank, then there's some fallback logic of, okay, where else should I look to determine, how to calculate these products? And so that's where the treatments editor will come and look here. Okay, maybe the application code doesn't have that information. We should look in the treatments editor. So again, only fill that in if it really truly is part of the treatment component. Part of what you're testing is the difference in application amount. Then fill that in here. Otherwise, it should be blank. Finally, if ARM doesn't find it here either, if both spots are blank, then there's a third section in the settings. So there's an application tab in the trial settings or the protocol settings. And it has that very same mix size calculator, our application amount and the mix size. So this is kind of the fallback. If nothing else, if nothing else has been filled in this study, ARM will go here to find the information. In some studies, and we've heard people say this, everything's so easy, simple, straightforward. It's the same mix size, it's the same spray volume for every product. We just throw it on the field, and it's simple. And so in that rare case, I suppose it's fine to leave things empty, but I really challenge people on that logic of saying, well, I don't want to have to fill it in, so I like using the trial settings. I think it's clearer. Sure, the calculation will work because, again, if nothing else is filled in anywhere else, it'll end up here. It'll use these values. But this is more of a default and fallback. And you really should go into ARM and go into the application equipment and be specific and say, for this application code, this is what happened. And you'll notice if I'll add a new column here, insert repeating section. The trial settings is a default for you. So if as you create your application codes, all I have to do is click into these cells, and the default value is what is in settings. So even if you're in that situation where it's all the same, all you gotta do is click into each one of those and it's been filled in. And then if you have multiple application codes, we have a really simple duplicate function here. So the little copy button at the top of an application code will let you copy whatever information you've entered in that column and distribute it to any other columns that you have. In this case, I've got everything filled in, but if you were doing a new protocol, you'd fill in A, hit copy, and then B, C, D, E could all be copied automatically just by clicking a button, and it would fill in all of those details. So try to make it easy. I think it's a best practice to be very clear about what occurred for each application code. Even if it's all the same, there's plenty of copy paste you can do. So there's one comment about the treatment editor page. that it allows the investigator to make custom mix sizes. So if multiple treatments are receiving the same application at one timing. And so I would encourage you, I think this example here would maybe show an alternative approach to that. So that's really what I have here is the Stomper Plus and the Super Stomp are really being applied at the same time. You would say we're going to go out to the field today and apply all of these treatments. They're all going to be done at the same time. But as you point out, maybe there's different mix sizes, and that's our very case here. The Super Stomp requires a different mix size than these products. And so what I have done, instead of relying on a difference in mix size here in the treatments editor, I'm using a separate application code and linking the appropriate treatments. So you're applying the exact same products, same rates at the same time. So then the other application, so then maybe application C, instead of being 200, would have a different spray volume then. Maybe this one we need less water perhaps for a later application. And I could adjust this mix size here to be smaller as well then. So then you would, in your scenario, you would be changing here on the treatments editor, mid-season you would change. Is that correct? You would start with 200, let's say, to do application A. We're going to do the 200. We'll just stick to the application amount, and the mix size will follow through. So the very first application, you would fill this in this way. And then later in the season, and we could certainly work if you had a specific question later, you would maybe change that. I have seen that done before. And the trouble is if you change that value, depending on when you are in the season, then you don't quite have the clarity of what was done at what point in time. And maybe I'm misunderstanding you. We can certainly, if I kind of butchered that, we can always work offline on that one. But hopefully the goal is to really utilize your application codes. Application equipment here to be very explicit about what happened when, and have the right mix size and application amount for when it occurred. So hopefully that made sense. That was one of the biggest targets of this webinar when we set it up. Each year we kind of have some of those struggles in getting that clear. Again, it really depends on the research you're doing. There's a lot of different combinations just based on the type of research being done and how your treatments are set up. And so the biggest takeaway with the setting up of the applications, of course, use application codes and link them to your treatment lines, and then fill in all the details of the application codes within that table. And that's where ARM will look first, is to find the application code information and use that on the spray seeding plan. So I've got a couple examples. I'm going to close this trial. I'm going to open my second one here, and it's got kind of it's got a lot of issues in it. It really created it to tackle kind of the most common support questions we see. Kind of the gotchas, the tricky things that end up tripping people up. And we've kind of touched on a couple of them just as we showed the applications. So they might go a little quicker, but just want to open this trial up, and I'm just going to start. We'll look real quick at the setup of the trial. It's basically this very similar example. we really have the exact same setup here with a couple of differences, and I added one more treatment, but basically more or less the same situation, just with a couple of differences here. So I'm going to print reports. We're just gonna kind of run through this report to see all of the problems. A lot, like I said, a lot of times we'll get questions. Here's my report. It's not doing what I want it to do, and so we'll just kind of work through this list. So the first one, we can see here that I'm printing out my report. In my report options, I don't have the application code sort by on, and yet in my report preview, for some reason, I'm being forced to have a separate page for every application. And I don't understand why is it printing out that way? I just want to have a simple list of my treatments and my calculations, and that's it. So that's a common question of how come ARM is forcing me to do it this way. And the reason is because of how the application codes are defined, our application structure. So you'll see that our products 2 and 3 are linked to A, B, and C. So the first 3 applications that we're doing all have 2 and 3 applied. Application code A, we have a mix size of 2.64. Application B, we have the larger application amount. So our mix size is 3.4. And then if we look at C, we have the 2.64 again. So for example, Stomper Plus here, the treatment number 2 would calculate to 82.5 milliliters for applications A and C. So the 82.5 is the same for both of them. But if we look at application B, it's 85. So it's close, but it's not the same. And so because we have the same product linked to different application codes that have different mix sizes, we would end up with a different product amount to measure. And so ARM can't physically put all that information on one single table because it depends on which application code you're talking about. The treatment number 2 will have a different amount to measure. So it's not possible to put it all onto one table. So when that situation happens, ARM will automatically split out by application. So in my case, I can, of course, just fix this. Typically, it depends on your study. That just may be the way it is. But in my case, to revert back so that they all print together, then I want these linked to their own applications. So now if application B is not part of 2 and 3, now when we preview the report, everything is together again. Again, the reason is treatment number 2, for example, now is all of its application codes have the same mix size, the same application amount. And therefore, we can print just one value. There is not a difference depending on the application. So that's now we are able to put it all back on one page, one table. But depending on your application structure, ARM is just always going to print them out separately if you have that situation. Next one here, if you look at the order of the treatments, you'll notice 3, 1, 2, 4, 5 is not in order. And so that's a common question. I just kind of like to have treatments in the treatment order on this report. And so that is an option. If we go into our report options, I'm going to click on more. And this will give us the full list of all of the options. And we have a tab at the top for sort. So this determines how the treatments should be sorted on the report. And you can either sort by a replicate. So maybe I want them sorted by the order I will encounter them in my first replicate, or I can just sort them by treatment number. So if I change the sort by to treatment, now when we preview the report, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the sorting of the treatments is an option you can find. Next problem to tackle, treatment number 3, you may have already noticed that that's blank. We don't have an amount of product to measure. So that's probably actually the question, number 1 question we get is how come I don't have a amount to measure here? The first thing I tell people to look at is the formulation type. That's the number 1 culprit for strange things on a spray seeding plan. What is the formulation type you've told ARM? Because that's how ARM knows whether the product is a dry or a liquid formulation, and also whether it's diluted in your carrier, your water in this case, or if it's undiluted. And both of those really matter, of course, based for what we're going to do for the application and what we should calculate. And in this case, my formulation type is empty. So we didn't even tell ARM anything about the formulation, and therefore it can't calculate. It doesn't know. Should I be weighing this because it's dry, or is it a liquid and I should give you the mils? So the fix is here in treatment 3. I need to fill in my form type. In this case, I can see it's the same as the one above it, so it's the EC. Now previewing that report, ARM now knows enough about that product that it can give us a calculation. Next one, kind of a similar solution actually. Treatment number 4, you'll notice, is bolded. And the reason it's bold is there's something different in this calculation compared to the other products here in the table. So that's ARM's way to draw some attention to it. This is a bit different. And you'll notice that number 1 is in grams. It's 1.2 grams per 1 plot instead of the mils per mix that the rest of these products are. And again, this answer ties back to our formulation type. So let's go look to see what DL is. So the formulation type we have told ARM this is it's a dustable powder. So it's dry and it's undiluted. So that's the key here in this case is that it's undiluted. So ARM will not use the mix size because this product does not need to be mixed with any carrier before it gets applied to the plot. And because it's dry, then we weighed it out in grams instead of milliliters. But the basis for that calculation is not mix size because we're not diluting it in anything first. So therefore, for the super stomp here, it is per 1 plot instead of per mix. So that formulation type is really a kind of a kicker for some of those behaviors for the report. It really is the engine for what ARM knows about that product to be able to create a calculation and determine what needs to be applied in that situation. So those are the most common gotchas for the report. I have one more example for kind of a granule application. I also see I have a, just want to check for questions as well. So I'll maybe cover that granule one quickly here, and so we have time for the leaf wall area as well. So that's this fifth treatment that we've mostly ignored so far. And essentially it's just kind of a, well, a few years ago, I would say it's an odd situation that we hadn't really encountered too often in support, but now I would say I probably answer this question 3-4 times a year. So I think it's becoming more popular with certain companies, certain products that are being used. And essentially, what you have is a dry fertilizer granule that's being applied on the plot. But first, before that granule gets applied, there's a liquid fertilizer that is going to be applied to that granule before it goes on the field. So it's a different setup. How do we calculate this liquid, the amount of liquid we put on the granules, because the liquid isn't directly going on the plot. We can't calculate per area because the liquid is really being applied to the fertilizer. So really the key, so what I've set up here, the rate is 2 liters of that liquid per ton of dry fertilizer. And then the dry fertilizer is applied at some sort of rate, kilograms per area, kilograms per hectare in this case. And so we have them as separate application codes, because of course this application is going to occur before we can put the dry fertilizer on the plots. So the trick is really 2 steps. The first thing we do is create a spray, we generate the spray seeding plan on the area of 1 treatment. Yes, I'll keep the product totals can come with 2. And we want to find out the amount to measure, the amount of product to measure for this dry fertilizer. So we'll have 600 grams for the 5, oh, that seemed too large. I want to calculate, nope, I'm sorry, the area of 1 treatment. So across the trial, in this case with our 5 replicates, there'll be 5 plots. So that's the amount of fertilizer we will need for those 5 plots for this particular trial. So we have 600 grams we will need to make that application. That 600 grams now we enter as the mix size for our liquid fertilizer. So here we'll go to the application code F. And we want to calculate the mix size here. We won't use this calculator. Instead, I'm going to use a user-defined of 600 grams. Now we'll choose grams of seed. Of course, seed isn't quite the right term in this case, but instead it's really, I envision the granule being equivalent to a seed. That you have these individual components that the product is being applied to. So we choose the 600 grams of seed. And so then we'll have a slurry rate here. And in this case, it doesn't matter because we're not going to put the liquid fertilizer that's going to go on the granule. We're not diluting it. If we did dilute it, then we could use the slurry rate. If you're not diluting it, what I typically do is just put in a 0 for the value so it's clear that there is no slurry rate. And then really the unit doesn't matter because it's 0. ARM chose per 100 kilograms because we chose grams of seed. The one key, and this is what typically trips people up, do not choose kilograms per hectare. It looks good. It sounds like something you might want because it's kilograms we're weighing out per the area of the plot, but that is a totally different type of application. We added it for like rice trials in Asia. And so it's got a whole different set of calculations, and it throws everything off. So it's kind of funny because really it doesn't matter what you pick, but don't pick that one. Just the way the math works. If you have the kilograms per hectare chosen here, the math comes out all weird and ARM can't calculate what we want it to calculate. But pretty much any other unit in this list, it'll do things correctly. It'll be a 0 and it won't matter. But the kicker is don't choose that kilograms per hectare because that throws everything off. So now we set the mix size for that liquid application onto those granules as 600 grams of those granules, which we just have seed in there, but that's what I imagine granule being equivalent to seed. And with that additional step here, then you can see we will have the dry fertilizer as the 600 grams for those 5 plots. And the liquid fertilizer, we now have a calculation of 1.2 mils we need to measure out to apply to those 600 grams of that fertilizer. So hopefully that helped if that's a particular situation that you are facing. Just another example of some unusual, well, I shouldn't say unusual, they're unusual to us, of just the questions we receive in the inbox, but that for that type of research, it's the way to go. It's the only thing they do. So that's all the tips and tricks I had. We had a couple comments about the treatments, and I did want to show the LWA real quick. Certainly, if there are other questions, feel free to pass those along. The leaf wall area and the canopy height, those are different types of applications, because I think the example given were for orchards or for grapes. When you have like a vine, and it's more common in Europe than here in the States, but I suspect that sooner or later here in the US we'll catch up to Europe in that fashion. That if you imagine the grapevine is really, the height of that grapevine matters a lot more than the area of the plot. So it really doesn't make sense to make an application based on the area of the plot. What you're more interested in is the area of the vine. So if you imagine the vine going down the row, I'll just make this little table be the thought of that vine. It's really a plane. And so we could calculate the area based on the height, the length of that row, calculate really the area of that wall. And so thus the term leaf wall area. And then of course, just depending on if you're going to apply both sides of the vine or just the one, things like that certainly factor into the calculation. But the idea then is we're being a little more sensitive to the height of that crop, and early on in the season, the application amount, the total application amount should be smaller than it is when that vine is full height. And so that that's really the theory. And of course, then there's really a difference in what goes into calculating that. Let me look to see if the question had some specific example. And so, yeah, you're really in a protocol standpoint as the sponsor now. It's a little tricky because you don't you don't have a concrete value yet. You know, there's nothing there yet. So you don't know what we have. So here I have a leaf wall area example. This was in the tutorial study list if you want to play with it yourself. A bunch of different products all being applied at really the same time. But I'm going to quickly go to the application tab. Oh, it's not even set up the way I thought it would be. That's pretty empty. Let me bring up my application plan, but I'm starting to think this trial I must have tampered with somehow. The application plan is the button you would want to choose. Yeah, for some reason I don't have like any of those application codes. The application plan though is really designed for this scenario here with the leaf wall area and the canopy height, because we're compiling together information that comes from a lot of different sections in ARM. So we'll have the crop, the row spacing, you know, details about the crop, as well as your canopy height and the leaf wall area, and then your application details. All that, a lot of these fields go into the calculation of your leaf wall area or the canopy height. And so this is a great tool to be able to see all of that together, and then you have the treatment list at the bottom. And here our example is our rate unit is 0.2 kilograms per hectare of leaf wall area is the basis for the rate unit. Some of these have canopy height as the rate unit. I would say the key for the sponsor filling out the protocol is that in a protocol, we can't calculate what the leaf wall area is at this point in time. You know, we don't have that. The crop isn't even there yet, it hasn't been planted, or it's, we're not in a trial yet. So the key is to go to the treated leaf wall area, and in the validation list for treated leaf wall area in a protocol, there's actually, we have a list of, I'll call them, I'll use your term of kind of a forecasted calculation for different crops. So for different crops, and we even, some of them have particular countries that are linked to, some of them will use like the same, here we have 3 different apple, it's the same apple, but a low, middle, and high. So at the beginning of the year, the beginning of the season, you would expect a smaller number, and then in the middle of the season, by the time the crop is fully grown, this would be kind of the maximum number. So most of these have 3, so now there's 3 apricot, there's 3 peaches, low, medium, and high. So these are just estimates for you to utilize to forecast based on early in the season, middle of the season, late in the season, what a typical leaf wall area may be. Again, just examples to give you that forecast. And maybe I'll just grab the tomato one, for example, and it'll put in that forecasted value in here for your protocol. So that way you can do a spray seeding plan. You can make sure that you plan for enough product. And when you generate the trial, ARM knows this was just an estimate, and so it'll be deleted from the trial automatically. So you don't have to worry about that estimate messing things up in the trial. But that's one tool for the leaf wall area. And just a quick note, we did also recently add, I think it would be in our application here. Let me do all fields. We did add, nope, where is that at? There's our leaf wall area. So that was the estimate here for the leaf wall area we just showed. It's on the crop stage. We did also add tree row volume as well. So a very similar idea, but more for those orchards to have that calculation. And again, in the protocol, it's really more of an estimate. hopefully that was helpful. One other question here that came in, printing labels for application amounts. Is there a way to isolate treatments? So let me do my print reports. And if you are generating a label, ARM's not going to like me because I'm not in the trial. But if you are generating a label, trying to think of which type, I don't know if it'd be a container maybe that you would be doing. There is, I guess there's an option here to select the application code you want to do. So that would, if you turn that option on, then when you press next to generate the label, ARM will ask you, do you want to, which application codes do you want to include? And in your example, then you could say applications A and B, and it will generate labels only for those applications. Then you can come back later, run the same report. It'll ask you what applications, and you could choose C and D. So that's just at the bottom of your labels, whichever label you have, the label option here at the bottom to print selected application code. Well, we're about out of time here. I appreciate the questions. Jeff, I know you had sent me a little bit more information. I'll try to read that and maybe I can process a little better offline and send you a note if need be. But I appreciate you all joining us today. I can hang on the line for a couple more minutes if you do have another question. But otherwise, I appreciate your attendance, and we'll send you the recording of this later today. And hopefully we'll be seeing you again at a future webinar. So thanks, everyone.